do this. Which screen? Okay, are you seeing the one that's with the windmill on it? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josh Metz with RGS, and we are here once again. This is our second convening of this group, and we're working out our processes, so it's not intended to be super stiff. It's meant to be conversational, but also follow some process because, as we know, that's how we can make our way through agendas that we're supposed to be talking about. So this is the one that we have developed for today, and you'll have some different folks talking. Those who you might have met on the last call, but I do see that there's a number of folks who were not on the last call. So maybe what we could do, just so that everybody is knows who everybody is and where you're kind of coming in from, if we can just go around the room with an intro. But Susan, since you're the first person to my right on my screen, I would pass it to you, and maybe you could explain what your current role in the group is, not forever, but for now.
Sure. And if we're going to popcorn this, I saw something really clever yesterday, which was everybody raised their hand. So when you popcorn it, you put your hand down on the on your.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then that way the popcorn in is much easy.
Oh, great. Excellent.
So
Good
thank
work.
you guys all for coming. I'm really excited about this this group. Audie, maybe somebody can ask Walter if his volume is turned up. I've made that mistake before, and I've turned my volume down for other reasons. Maybe that. I'm Susan. I'm with Arcade Economic Development Corporation. We're the fiscal agent administrators for the Redwood Region RISE grant. And we put this group together of people who have some background in finance. So that when we look at the projects that are coming through, we're not going to be 100% reliant on the state's implementation funds. So we can bring together all of our wealth of knowledge and see how we can get some of the projects done, whether or not we're able to get them funded through the implementation. So I'm very happy you're all here. I know many of you and invited many of you for very specific reasons. Last time we met, a few folks said, I don't really have a lot of background in finance, but then later realized that maybe if they work for cities, they've done some infrastructure financing or grant writing. And that's one kind of expertise versus somebody else that might do capital stacking and public-private partnerships versus somebody else who might have experience with new market tax credits. So if you feel like your experience is not broad in finance, we did pick you guys all out for a reason, because you have some great knowledge. So I'm very happy you're all here. And we'll just have you give your name and your who you're working with, and I will call on James Clore and put my hand down.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is James Clore, and I work with the Humboldt Area Foundation and Wild Rivers Community Foundation. And I will call on Valerie Starkey.
Hi, I'm Valerie Starkey. I'm one of the Board of Supervisors up here in Del Norte County, and I will call on Robert Garnett.
All right, I'm Robert Gernert. I'm the Executive Director at the Economic Development and Financing Corporation in Ukiah. We cover Lake Mendocino and Sonoma counties. I'll call on Jeff Lucas.
Oh.
Everybody has their hand. Must be a good meeting. I don't know.
Walter's working it out there. How about Sarah Barber? She's up in my upper left corner.
Hi, I'm Sarah Barber. I work for Yurok Economic Development Corporation, and I also manage the Alliance CDFI.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot I have to pick someone. Ross Welch.
I knew you'd pick me, Sarah. So I'm Ross Welch, Executive Director of AEDC. And I shall pick Eric Weir in Del Norte.
Ross, thank you. Eric Weir, City Manager, City of Crescent City. And I will go up to my upper left corner and go Ashley Taylor.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Taylor. I'm the Director of Economic Development and Recreation for the City of Crescent City, and I will pass it off to Craig.
Hi, everyone. I'm Craig Schlutter. I'm with the City of Ukiah, Community Development Director. We'll pass it off to Marianne Petrillo.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marianne Petrillo, CEO of West Business Development Center. Happy to be here and learn more, and I'm going to pass it off to my friend Layla.
Hi, everyone. Layla Roberts, Director of Just Community Development and Investment with Humboldt Area Foundation and Wild Rivers Community Foundation, and I will pass it on to Greg Gare.
Hi, Yuki. My name is Greg Gare. I'm the CEO for Northern California Indian Development Council, or NCIDC. And I shall pass it off to Double G Greg, Mr. Foster.
Thank you. It's always good to be on a call with someone with a great name, even though he spells it wrong. Greg Foster, Executive Director, the Redwood Region Economic Development Commission. We do a lot of stuff, but we're primarily a revolving loan fund in Humboldt County. And we're a joint powers authority, so I have 19 elected officials on my board. Oh,
Who's
and I'm
next?
supposed to pass it off to, how about Stacy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stacy Pico. I am with Economic Development and Financing Corporation. We are located in Ukiah. We serve Mendocino, Lake, and parts of Sonoma County.
And then you were going to pick somebody, but I would also remind Layla that once have you gone yet, Layla? Oh.
I did, but I want to go again, which is why I left my hand up.
Oh, okay. Because I was just going to remind you that once you have gone, you bring it down. But go ahead, please.
I was kidding. Let's say Tracy Taylor should go next.
Okay.
Hi there, I'm Tracy Taylor. I'm the Director of Finance at AEDC, and I'm just here to learn as much as I can. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Bridget Lacey.
I'm Bridget Lacey. I'm the Grants and Economic Development Coordinator for the City of Crescent City, and I will pass it on to Tracy Fuller.
Hi, thank you. My name obviously Tracy Fuller. I'm with the regional RGS, Regional Government Services JPA, and I'm attached to the team because of my background in finance, financing, accounting, and economic development. Thank you. I'll pass it to Dana.
Thank you. I'm Dana Stroud. I'm with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or what we refer to as GoBiz, and I'm providing regional support for what we know as the Redwood Rise region. And I'm going to pass it over to Amanda Hickey.
Thanks, Dana. Hi, everyone. Amanda Pisania Hickey, Director for Research and Policy at CCRP, and we are serving as the regional conveners of Redwood Region Rise. And I will pass it to our friend from Lake County, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Nicole Flora, Executive Director of the Lake County Economic Development Corporation. And I don't see anyone else's hands up.
Yeah.
Is it my
Oh, that's it. I think there's a couple of us from there's Walter. He's got his hand up.
Hi, sorry about that. A lot of technical difficulties here on my end, but I'm Walter Gray. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with the Hoopa Valley Tribe up in northeastern Humboldt County.
Excellent. Glad you could make it, Walter, and persevering with the technical. This is a part of the challenge, but it's also what makes us able to convene with such low, travel miles behind us and everything like that. So there are a few others on the call from the RGS team who you can see, you will be seeing. And yeah, so this is quite the group. When you talk about economic development and especially the kind of jobs first planning process that's been going on, and some of us have been in these planning rooms around the state. I know Dana has for sure, and I've been in a few other regions. Having the convening of people with a real sort of economic development in their title or finance aspect of their work is, less the norm than it is in other kind of economic development settings that I've been in. So I think just getting everybody together in a format like this with a focus in the 4-county region is hopefully going to be real valuable for all the reasons that we have outlined. And if you missed the beginning of, or the first convening here, there is a slide deck that kind of is available. It's on the website for the webpage, the Redwood Region Rise webpage, and perhaps Abigail, if you could look that up and put it in the chat. Within there's a slide deck that kind of walks you through the scope of the work that we're doing and some of the deliverables so that we don't have to cover all of that today. But I'll be serving as the facilitator. As I mentioned, Susan is formally the chair of this working group, and we are, like I said, trying to keep it somewhat informal so that it's allows conversational. So if you have subjects that you want to raise your hand for, please do, and we'll try to accommodate them. In the event that it is time constrained and so on, we'll table and follow up after. But really, this is intended to go through a series of topics. The first phase of the work is really a preparation for a larger phase 2. So a lot of this will be just surfacing these topics, and our main goal at the end of phase 1 will be to bring back a action plan that we'll have a chance to weigh in on, that will inform really the phase 2 and the broader capacity building work that will happen. But hopefully along the way, we'll be delivering value all along the way. And so some of the materials, including what we're going to be sharing here, are we'll have links and things like that. Before getting on to our first guest speaker of the thing, I wanted to mention that Susan and I had a conversation earlier this week, and the subject of finding a way to give members, because a lot of you have projects that you've already been involved in, and perhaps those can serve as great examples of how some of these different, especially capital projects, come together. And so, Susan, did you want to say anything more about that? The idea around what we were talking about?
Yeah, is this about for our following meetings?
Yes, for subsequent meetings, right?
So one of the things that we're going to be doing is collecting a series of case studies, different things that have been financed locally, so that people are not only learning about what options there are for financing projects, but they can actually see what has been done and how it's been done. So we were thinking every meeting we would be able to highlight some project and really talk about the different financing that was involved in that. Greg, I'm glad you're here today, because I think we're going to kick it off next time by talking about the NCIDC Carson Block building and the way we were able to pull together just a whole myriad of funding programs to get this crown jewel of Eureka built. And then I'm sure you all have some example of something that's happened in your community, so that we can hear, how did in Ukiah the big the upgrade through town, with the roadway, how did that get funded, Craig? And so that would really help us as we're moving forward and looking at different projects. So.
Fair warning, I had hair when we started the financing for that project.
But now you just have a big, beautiful building. So it's fair trade.
Very true.
Yeah, well, that's a common through thread and certainly major capital infrastructure projects, but all of this work as it's long time frames. But just if for this working group, while we have we have a year's worth of work in front of us. First phase is 6 months, so we'll have about 4 to 5 more formal meetings like this. We may factor in a few more subgroups and guest speakers, but I think that would give us at least an opportunity to have one focus project from each region, maybe from a tribal project if that is different than the one you talk about in Eureka. But if you have one that you think would be great, like the Ukiah Streetscape or another project, I don't know what's happening up in Del Norte that might be interesting to talk about, please let us know and we'll try to factor it into our agenda planning. So that's kind of what we wanted to daylight here. And so one of the things that we also had a request for at the last meeting was what we're calling Economic Development 101. And since we have our state expert in that, in the form of one of our state experts in that, Gerbak Sahota, the president and CEO of Cal Ed, she's offered to walk us through the way the Cal Ed, which is Association for Local Economic Development, looks at this problem and has for several years, looks at this domain rather, and then lays out the foundation of what some have referred to as traditional economic development, but really I think it's public agency oriented economic development occurs and some of the themes that they focus on. And at the end, I'll wrap it around with trying to draw a connection with some of the jobs first framing and how it's important to draw this connection to the public agency side, even though we're seeking very actively to increase the range of participants and certainly lift up those who may not have been traditionally involved in this work. So with that as an introduction, Gerbak, you have the floor. And if you just want to give me a ear pull or a nod, I'll move the slides for you when the time's right.
All right, thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone. Again, it's nice to see so many familiar faces, and there's quite a few new faces in the crowd. So nice to meet you all if I haven't already. Susan, I saw that you'd put in chat that Raymond, Jeff, and Anna didn't get a chance to introduce themselves. Would you like to do that real quick before I get started?
Okay. Sorry about that. Missed those.
No problem.
All right.
I can go. Oh, go ahead.
This Raymond Bacon, UROC Economic Development Corporation. I'm the executive director. Nice to meet everyone.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't show up on my screen. So
no, I apologize too. I popped on a couple minutes late, so I kind of missed the sequence. Anna Mack, and I'm with the County of Mendocino in Economic Development, and we work closely with RGS already, and yeah, looking forward to this.
All right.
I don't know Jeff Lucas, right? Where's Jeff?
Hi, this is Jeff. Yeah, Jeff Lucas with the Community Development Services. We work in Lake and Mendocino and a few other areas, primarily in grants and business loans and business assistance, and work pretty closely with the Lake County Economic Development Corporation.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. And just one more before you go, Gerbak, is if there are subjects that you want to chat about, feel free to use the chat. And if there are ones you want to speak up about, raise your hand. Gerbak.
All right, Josh, if you'll please go to the next slide. And then also, as Josh was saying, if you're going to put stuff in chat, just know that I might not see it. So if you see something, Josh, chime in, or you guys just speak if you want to talk about any of the things that we bring up during the presentation. So a couple of things from the beginning. I think it's really important to talk about why we're talking about the basics of economic development or economic development 101. I see a lot of veterans in this group, and I'm not going to embarrass myself or anyone else by saying how long you guys have been doing economic development, but I do know that there's also a lot of new folks. So part of this is about talking about what economic development is in a way that we're all using the same language. And the language that we talk about when we're using economic development is current, and it's also the stuff that we've written about in partnership with EDA, USDA, and a host of other organizations to help educate communities on what economic development is. So CALED was founded in 1980, and it was founded to grow the profession of economic development. We have over 850 members. Most of those are cities and counties, but we also have a lot of economic developers that are nonprofits. They might be private sector that are assisting, and then JPA members, which, as you know, are quasi-governmental. So good cross-section. What that means for us is that not only do we get the state level policy view of what's happening in economic development and the federal policy view, we also get to see into the communities, the work that's being done, and how economic development is evolving over the years. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get towards the end of the slide deck. But I also want to be mindful that I committed to Josh I was going to do this in 15 minutes. There's more slides than we probably need to get through this, but hopefully the slide deck itself will serve as a great resource for those of you that are new to economic development. So next slide, please. These are the topics I'm going to cover today. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about a common language for defining economic development. Economic development is the creation of wealth through which community benefits are realized. I'm going to leave that up there and let it, oh, go back. You're faster than me. I'm going to leave that up there for a bit because I want to delve into this. Oftentimes people can't see their role in economic development or their goals when you start looking at a broad definition like this, but economic development has been about creating economic opportunity for residents. And the thought has been if you help businesses thrive, businesses that align with the values and the fabric of the community, if you help them thrive and they're creating opportunity for your residents, it's also bringing dollars back into the coffers of local government, state government, and other entities so that you can then reinvest in your community and community benefits are realized. It is not a pro-business lobby. It's not supporting business just for the sake of supporting business. The end game of economic development is to support community benefits. And so we talk a lot about that because I think that's gotten lost in some of at least the political rhetoric that you hear about economic development. But again, it's the creation of wealth through which community benefits are realized. So next slide, please. From our perspective, when we're talking to local elected officials, and several of these slides are from a deck that I use to train and coach elected officials, we talk about the different perspectives, and these are really broad, right? Within each one of these, you could see a lot of different groups. For example, on the community side, we talk about a community's perspective on economic development. It should translate the community vision into reality by integrating the needs of the residents and businesses with municipal goals. I think that's really critical for government, and it's what you're seeing happening with the Jobs First program in particular, making sure the community stakeholders that might have felt left out in the past are at the table for these conversations. Elected officials, obviously, many of us know that perspective. Government's perspective, I went over that a little bit, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that. And then businesses, your employers, your entrepreneurs, as the governor called them, the risk takers that help move the economy forward and create opportunity for others. All this to say, it takes a lot of people to come together to have a thriving economy and to move economic development forward at the local level. So next slide. So I'm going to talk again about the public perspective. As I'd mentioned to you earlier, we have over probably, I think now, nearly 300 jurisdictions that we represent, local economic developers, state economic developers, and teams at the federal level that also do economic development. The reason we talk about the public perspective is because when we think about economic development, we think about it from the perspective of who continually invests in economic development and why. More often than not, it is government at all levels, because you're trying to use your limited resources to create that positive level or positive effect on the level of business activity, employment, income distribution patterns, and fiscal solvency. Now, there's absolutely a role for community and other stakeholders to play in it, but more often than not, where you see the most consistent engagement, it is going to be from government. And it is to make sure that not only are we creating opportunity for residents, we have an economy that's working and thriving, and we also have revenue to provide the safety net, the benefits, the activities and resources that our residents need as well. So public sector perspective, next page. I'm going to talk a little bit about why, other than what I just mentioned, why we focus on the public sector role. Obviously, if you're a local government, and many of you are that are on this call, or your state government, or your federal, I mean, you want to make sure that you're maintaining and increasing and diversifying your tax base. We specifically, at every few years, we see something else, another shock to the economy in different areas of the state, where if you haven't diversified your tax base, as a strategy, as an economic development strategy, you're struggling. One of the concerns we had was what's happening to communities that are reliant solely on small businesses, solely on tourism, as we saw the businesses closing down during COVID. So how do you, from a strategic economic development standpoint, make sure that you're diversifying your tax base? Increasing revenues faster than the cost of municipal services, economic vitality for your neighborhoods, maximizing property through highest and best use. And you'll see I included create and retain jobs and increase per capita income, because this tends to be the space where most folks really focus on for economic development. The conversation turns really quickly into jobs, but it's more than jobs. Creating economic opportunities for residents. And then the final one, the one I mentioned earlier, generating revenue to pay for programs and investing in community development. So public sector has an important role. These are some of the tools that public sector can bring to the table, whether it's your tax structure, sharing taxes, where you choose to invest and spend money. Do you have money for incentives? I would say most communities, the state included, aren't necessarily throwing incentives out there. Marketing, quality service to your businesses and your residents, and other places where you choose to invest. So these are the types of activities and tools you would see the public sector use to help support a business-friendly environment. Next slide. Traditional economic development programs. This is where I'm going to slow down, because I want to talk about what's happening in the environment. And one of the things that we're hearing is traditional economic development being talked about as a pejorative term, right? Traditional economic development hasn't served my community, or it hasn't done, what I expected it to, or it hasn't given a voice to the table. And I want to be clear, for those of you that are practitioners, you know this. If you're new to economic development, you may or may not know this, but economic development in California is anything but traditional. In fact, it has to evolve consistently and constantly. You see that even with the Jobs First program, how it's changed from the time that the initial enabling legislation was written to what it looks like now. There's nothing traditional about the way economic development gets done. And the reason for that is the problems are different. They're different at any point in time, but also in jurisdictions across the state. The challenges we might have been dealing with a few years ago could be totally different than they are now, or many are the same, but a new one's popped up. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because you don't want to get in this mindset where you're like, these are the 3 things I'm going to do for economic development, and I'm not going to change. Where I don't think any of us have ever been in a position where we don't have to change to meet the issues and challenges of today. So being careful in the language around economic development, I think, is really important. But big picture, when you hear professional economic developers talk about what they're doing, these are the types of activities they focus on from a business assistant standpoint. Business retention and expansion, critical in California. I mean, again, we're not a state that's going to lead the race to the bottom and throw incentives out at businesses. We are a state that cares for the businesses we have. You saw that with the small business relief grants, $4 billion out the door to small businesses to help them stay alive or to thrive during the COVID closures and some of the challenges that happened during that time. So helping your already existing businesses is critical to every community in California, including the state, when you're talking about business retention and expansion and a critical economic development piece. Business attraction. This is the one that gets the most visibility. This is also the one, surprisingly, that people that don't touch economic development think where we spend most of our time. Business attraction is not easy, and most businesses are pretty smart when they're looking to locate somewhere. They're looking for the business case. They're also looking for, have you taken care of the businesses that are already in your community? So this notion that every economic developer is spending resources out there doing solely business attraction just doesn't resonate when you look at what's happening within the communities across the state and when you see what's happening within the state structure itself for economic development. And then business creation, without a doubt, this is a place where California stands out head and shoulders, I think, above our counterparts. Talking about how do we help businesses, entrepreneurs with an idea, get from idea to a place where they're a thriving business. And a lot of you provide that support that happens along the way to become a thriving business. So you know how critical it is. It's also important from the perspective, I serve on the state's task force where we're talking about entrepreneurship as a strategy for economic mobility. For lots of, whether it's a community of color or communities that have been left behind, if you can't find or there's not the economic opportunity you're looking for, or potentially, you came here, you have an idea of a business you want to start, being able to plug into already existing systems or find places where you can meet similarly minded entrepreneurs, that's a great place to be. And California offers that in a lot of our communities. It's also a very expensive proposition. So as you're looking at places where you can find economic development finance support for it, I suspect that'll come up in later conversations if supporting entrepreneurship is critical to your business support strategy under economic development. All right, I know I'm talking fast. I'm going to keep going until somebody interrupts me or Josh stops me. So projects and transactions, this is you guys. This is where I think many of your conversations are going to be. Susan mentioned that aside from the funding that's available through Jobs First, you want to be able to find other ways of funding the things that are important to you, the projects that have come up, whether that's creating a capital stack or just looking for different resources altogether. So what's happened, many of you might remember that we used to have the redevelopment agencies and a lot of economic development finance, especially when you're looking at downtown revitalization, infrastructure, affordable housing, some of the component pieces that were land-based, real estate-based projects that supported economic development. When we lost redevelopment and that funding source, we also lost a lot of the expertise at the local level. We are definitely seeing that starting to build back up again. So it's great to be part of this series of trainings through RGS because it gives us a chance to talk about these tools and help educate the next generation of leaders that are going to be doing these projects. And again, some of you already do some of this work and are expert at it. So this is just an idea of some of the different types of financing tools. I'm not going to go into this slide because I know that through this series, you all are going to cover it. But if this is new to you, and if it looks like a foreign language, don't worry, you're going to get through it because we're going to talk about a lot of it. And then a lot of it's in the resources that we'll share with you as well. So that was a lot about economic development, why it's important from the public sector perspective, and then just bringing it back to, it really is about quality of life, right? We're creating wealth because we want to support community development and we want to make sure we have benefits for our residents and they can live the life that they want to and that they have the standard of living that they desire and should have as well. Next slide. Economic development myths. You heard me talk about this a little bit. What's happening in the environment today also, and part of this is because of the changes we saw over the last few years, but I think this tension has always been there. We certainly hear it a lot from political rhetoric in particular. So some myths about economic development. It's only about jobs. It's not only about jobs. If some of you will remember back to 2009 when we had the Great Recession, if your only metric of success for economic development was how many jobs you created, you probably wouldn't have a job by the time it was done yourself. So it's not just about jobs. It is about investment. There's depending upon what your economic development goal is, and that's specific to your community, to your group, your metric should speak to that. It shouldn't just be a flat, we're about jobs. I already talked to you a little bit about economic development is not focused solely on attraction. In fact, most communities don't have the ability to focus solely on attraction, while there are groups that do that work. Pro-business lobby, I think this is really important too. Many of you, again, will remember now I'm going to date myself. Should I say? Yeah, okay, I'm going to date myself. Probably about 20 years ago, I remember when I came into CalEd, started working at CalEd, one of the conversations was about chambers versus local government doing economic development. And the concern was that chambers helped that time, helped the businesses that were in the membership, and they were solely focused on the business side. Whereas local governments and their focus on economic development was really making sure that the businesses and the environment they were creating was aligned with the vision and values of the community. So economic development is a pro-economy lobby, and pro-economy in the way that it supports the values and visions of the vision of the residents, excuse me. It's not just about supporting business for the sake of supporting business. Somebody put, I remember when you started, I can't see the rest, but I hope it doesn't say it was a long, long time ago. All right, unclear connection to workforce housing and specific industries. So I've heard people, and again, this is a statewide perspective. We talk to a lot of folks about this, say workforce and economic development is the same thing. It's not the same thing. Oftentimes, workforce is funded through a federal program, and they have workforce development centers are really constrained by the metrics and the things that they have to do in order to show that they've met the requirements of the funding that they receive. So to say that the same thing is not entirely accurate. It is an important piece of economic development, and they should work hand in hand. And it would be great if they aligned all the time at the local level, but they don't necessarily. In fact, sometimes you'll see a workforce group that's working on training for a program, but the economic developers might be working on supporting a totally different business sector. So it's critical, again, in your tables that you have at the local level, it's great to have all these different partners at the table so you can create that alignment. Workforce and economic development are not the same thing, but they are important to each other in order to create a successful economy. Housing. The other thing that we're hearing in the environment a lot, and this is wearing my advocacy hat, is this fight of housing versus economic development. From our perspective, there's no fight. We need both. We need affordable housing so that, we have residents are comfortable and that they can also actually supply the workforce we need for our economy to thrive. We need both, and we need both in good measure. We need economic development to thrive, so we have those funds available to support affordable housing development. We know that for a long time, market rate housing was being built, even if it wasn't at the scale that the state wanted to see. Affordable housing is difficult to build because it needs the subsidies. Government can only do that if they have the funds to put it in. So we need both. Specific industries, oftentimes we'll hear one industry is the only industry that matters for economic development. That really does undermine the argument that you want to diversify your tax base. It's not just one industry. So looking at what's thriving in your community and what's next to thrive in your community is really important to be successful. The final myth I would say with economic development, and we hear this more so from an activism perspective, that it's not connected to people in place. And I'll tell you, and I think a lot of you have experienced it, if you're doing economic development, especially if you're doing it at the local level, you've got to have an economic development strategy that is informed by your community and informed in a way that as you're looking at 5, 10, 20 years, the things that you're creating, whether it's the spaces, the infrastructure, or the opportunities, they align with the feedback the residents have given you. So that would be the final myth that I would share. And I know a lot of communities already have economic development strategies. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I think I'm close to my last slide, just talking about the environment, going back to that last piece about economic development being perceived as not being connected to people and place. The people that are doing economic development or engaging with economic development today, and Josh, this is to your point that you'd made at our board meeting a few weeks ago, there's more stakeholders that want to be at the table in economic development, and that's a good thing. But there's also a change in the language. There's the language that you see the programs, and you'll see it as you're applying for funds or you're looking at different economic development finance programs. There's a specific language of economic development, but you don't necessarily see everybody or hear everyone speaking that language One of the things that we're doing in probably all of our trainings at this point is trying to help people navigate, well, you said this, and this is how it ties in to these programs, but figure out, are we speaking the same language, and aren't we all trying to move forward in the same direction, and that we're creating economic opportunity for everyone? And how are we doing that in a way that aligns, again, with the vision and the values that we have? So language is really important. Do you mind going back back to that slide, Josh? Sorry. And implementation. So the other thing we're seeing on the implementation side post-pandemic is that there are a lot of folks that are interested in engaging. There's a language challenge, as I mentioned, but the final piece is that there's economic development programs that are being implemented, and not everybody is at the table of those programs. And I think it's because there is a timing component, right? As some folks are learning more about economic development, trying to engage, you've got professional economic developers that have been in this space for a long time that are charged with doing the work, and they're moving forward doing the work. The tables that you guys have set and the conversations you're having are important in creating alignment to not only get people to plug into what you're doing, but so that you can plug into what's already happening in the communities as well. Yeah, I would say you guys are ahead of the game in hearing how many folks here are already in the economic development space. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Josh. Thank you. And then the final piece I'd want to share with you is measuring success. Regardless of how you're talking about economic development or what you think is important in your space for economic development, having success metrics and making sure that everybody knows what those metrics look like is a really important piece of how you all are going to move your projects forward. And I suspect you'll have those conversations as you start talking about the methodology and the criteria used to identify which projects you want to see get funded and how those are getting funded. But knowing really clearly, what does success look like in the economic development space in your table? This has been a challenge for the economic development profession for quite some time. This isn't new, but it continues, and I would say it's especially more challenging for you all because you have such a variety of voices at the table in these jobs first regions and the work that y'all are doing. All right, next slide. Resources. We have a ton of resources. As I said, we partner a lot with the federal government, different entities to create tools, with the exception of this tax primer, which was practitioners and attorneys and CalEd's membership that have either worked in the past on tax increment financing tools or are currently working on them. So we have these on our website. We can also send out hard copies for anybody that's interested in getting them. And Susan, if you want us to send you some to distribute, we can do that as well. Josh, next slide. We have webinars on, podcasts on very specific topics that might interest you all, like rural recovery and resiliency. These are practitioners. These are people that have been in the weeds doing the work, talking about their best practices, their best advice for folks that are doing economic development today, understanding community culture and building trust. Oh my, going blind. Sorry, you guys. That font is so baby on my screen. And then we have videos on what the basics of economic development are. And I know, Marianne, I think you shared this some time ago, but you're welcome to share these. These resources are on our website. Next page, next slide. I'm a resource, happy to help you guys if you have questions. I know that was a lot of content and I know I spoke fast. So Josh, I don't know if you want to take questions or we move on and then you guys can listen to it again at your own leisure and come back with questions.
Yeah, I think if there are any burning questions for Gerbax at the moment, we can certainly take those up. You know, as you all know, we are recording all of this. So part of our deliverables will be these series of recorded meetings that folks will be able to reference. But if I'm not seeing any hands raised, I'm going to just move along to the next slide, which actually supports what Gerbax was saying. And really just calls out the foundations for the Jobs First program, which if you're in this meeting, you're already familiar. But what I wanted to emphasize, sort of going from the traditional economic development view to what is different in this program, to me, it is the focus on equity, sustainability, and economic resilience as key planks of this effort. And I think it's super timely because these are the really important and critical things that we need to get right if we're going to build our way towards the bright future that we all want. So I think it's a really unique opportunity that we have, and I'm just honored to have the privilege to participate in this work with all of you on that. We wanted to bring back a couple of topics from the last meeting and go a little deeper than what we have done already, because we assume that most of us have some familiarity with the space. And so we wanted to take the time to address the tax increment financing space and non-debt funding sources to a level. Again, this project is setting up to inform a larger outreach to increase the capacity beyond those of us in this room. And so we are going to touch on these a little bit more and then provide a series of web references that you all can follow up with at your leisure. Yes, that is, I believe this is the project from the Hoopa Health Center, if I'm not mistaken, that's in this picture. And so that would be a project that we'd love to hear about. I think in this in the reviewing of different projects, how this one came together or is coming together, if it's not already completed. And what you'll see is in the pictures that we've included here, a lot of them, I'm trying to use the pictures not just as pretty things to look at, but as actually referencing specific projects. So if you have a project that you have a nice picture of and like to send my way, we'll build it into a future one. But for this phase of the workshop, and again, if there's anything you want to talk about, you can raise your hand. Feel free to jump in. I'm going to introduce my colleague Xenia Bradford, who has got extensive public finance experience as a city manager and a finance director on the Central Coast, and is now working with us to talk a little bit more about the subjects that are shown here. These are the topics that we referenced last time. And I think what we're going to do is focus on the two at the moment, the grants and TIFs, for a little bit more discussion. Xenia.
Thank you, Josh. And it's really great to hear how extensive is the experience and expertise in this group in both economic development and finance field. So as we talk about these subject matters, they may be new or very well known to you, and we are really looking to engage this group in selecting the topics for future discussions and larger engagement in the regions. So as Josh mentioned, we talked about different funding and financing sources, and we could definitely dive into those in great depth as is desired and as we find them to be useful for specific projects that may be of interest to you. But we wanted to really focus on the two areas, which is the grants and the tax increment financing, versus focusing on resources such as the general fund, which is usually already fully engaged and doesn't really have the capacity to target larger projects, regional projects, and economic development initiatives that you may be willing to move forward. So when we talk about grants, we know that most of the grants are usually competitive in their process. And the more prepared you are in submitting for the grant, the better. So it is good to look at the communities of interest and where those interests align throughout your region. align your grant applications with the strategic plans that may be already in place for the regions. And you may already have some feasibility studies or even some plans and engineering studies for those projects that are usually also helpful in moving forward and being actually selected for a grant as they're looking for that project readiness. So we want to be not opportunistic, but we want to be strategic in applying for grant applications. There is lots of opportunities there, but it's how do you select the grants that are most feasible for your funding needs and that will most likely yield a selection of your jurisdiction. So we want to minimize any last minute scrambles. And of course, it's very important for to be mindful of all the parties that are engaged in that grant application, especially when we talk about multi-jurisdictional applications, to make sure that we have enough time for approval of those projects as you go through your councils or boards or whatever entities you need to push these projects through. Next slide. So this slide just lists some of the opportunities at the state level and the federal level. Both could be leveraged and definitely leveraged with your tax increment financing tools. You may have philanthropic community that may be willing or wanting to contribute to those projects as well. But what we're really looking for here is taking advantage of the coordination of this regional group and making sure that, once again, we have the curation of funding grant-making opportunity resources. So you want to create databases, communication processes, form grant writing teams, and create that coordination among your members. Next slide. So moving on from grants to the tax increment financing, and tax increment financing tools can also increase your eligibility for certain grants. So that's something always to consider. What this slide shows is that creating a tax increment financing district or tool, which have replaced the RDAs, is a current tool that's available that is still, for my jurisdiction, is a learning tool, but it allows to basically form a legal entity that then can take advantage of future anticipated property tax from your projects and be able to fund those projects throughout the time. So if we go to the next slide, this is a list of a number of currently available tax increment financing tools that are enabled by the state legislation. They all have different rules for their formation and different opportunities within each one of these types of tax increment financing for various projects. But essentially, they can, by the most part, fund your projects for capital investment, for your local government jurisdictions, as well as larger regional projects, healthcare and affordable housing and other elements. So we listed these resources here once again, citing the primary and California tax increment financing tools from CalEd as our partner. You can go ahead and research some of these tools on your own time. We will be distributing this information to you, but we also look forward to learning more about the projects in the region and coming back to some of these tools in more detail to help you identify which ones of these tools may be useful to move forward and educate the greater community. Josh?
Thank you, Xenia. Yeah, so this these links here on this deck will get you to resources that step you through the process of forming these districts and introduce that's in the EIFD and the CRIA categories. And then with regard to the Climate Resilience District, which is relatively new legislation, which provides for specific, they're basically EIFDs with a climate layer that allow projects to that may address things like fire risk reduction, sea level rise implications, and other things that are driven really by climate change. It's legislation led by Senator Dodd and is rolling, is sort of coming out as a new tool, and I expect will be of great interest to the North Coast residents. So I think that will be one that we will want to track and dive into in more depth. I would also point out that there's a very useful chart here, the EIFD CREA comparison chart, where if you have projects of interest in your community, you would want to take a look at that to be able to fairly quickly assess which mechanism may be the best for your project area. One thing who we do not have with us today is our man Scott Adair with the county, and he, along with some of our leaders, consultants in this arena in the state, the Cosmont Company, were responsible for putting together the Samoa EIFD, which is one of the larger EIFD that have been created. And yes, Scott is with the county of Humboldt. One thing that was pointed out to me recently, unique aspect of the EIFD is that they don't necessarily have to be contiguous geography. So if you have multiple projects that may be focusing on a common subject matter or theme, you can form these districts across large areas with but discontinuous areas, if that is of benefit. What I would also offer is that we could bring back for a special in-depth briefing to this group some of these state experts that I've mentioned to really, get into the weeds on these tools. If that is of interest to the group, you can let us know and we can make that arrangement. Are there any questions on this coverage at the moment? I'm looking at 3 different screens here, so if I'm looking not directly at the camera, let me pull this up here. Anyone have anything good to say? Craig Schlater, what can you say about EIFDs in Ukiah?
But we don't have any EIFDs yet.
Are you looking at them as a potential tool for your area?
Potentially. I mean, we're always looking at something, any tools really. So, we're interested in looking at it further. I'm also interested in, I had heard in a recent conference, I think Joe from Cosmont was talking about this development something or other reserve. I can't remember the tool, but I want to hear more about that as well. So there's some good tools out there.
Yeah.
It seems to me that an EFD is a great tool, but you got to learn some patience when you go after it. There's gonna be a lot of upfront cost in terms of setting it up and getting it all ready, but yeah, that tax increment may not come in for a while. So have some projects in mind, I guess, or even on the drawing board. That's what we did with the EIFD here. When I say we, County of Humboldt, I really didn't have anything to do with it, but I think the first year the total revenue was like $630 or something.
Right.
So,
right. Well,
so these things take support until the actual reassessments occur and you start getting that increment. They got more recently, so that's nice.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it goes on what Jeff Lucas has put in there. This question about what would be a good project to justify establishing an EIFD, and I think it would be a project like the Samoa, where all the different industrial work is planned for out there for the for the wind power and the aquaculture. So it's a 7-year, 10-year long kind of view.
I mean, I think our fast project over there will be done in a couple years. The Nordic, and it's been going on for a long time, but on, that's a $500 million plus or minus investment from the company there. Not all that will turn into tax increment, but so that one was it's particularly great because we had these huge projects interested, and this was not necessarily taking it, put in place to benefit those projects, but to benefit from them. And so anyway, it's a great tool. I do miss redevelopment though.
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of times the timeframes of the where the tax increment is going to local can be up to 30 years, I believe, is kind of the outside time frame. It could be longer, but definitely is not limited to 7 or 10 years. And really, it's about value creation at the end. So one of the things in California is the property tax flows through the counties. So there has to be an agreement by the counties to sort of support they get a percentage of their property tax that is no longer general fund, blended into their general fund. It goes back to that specific geography that's defined in the EIFD. And so they have to be willing to give up that portion of their property tax revenue to have it reinvested in the specific project areas that are covered by the district. So,
and in our case, the initial discussion after the EFD law passed was, well, that's great. We're never going to apply for it just because we're never going to have enough property tax growth to justify our work on it in the county. And then Nordic showed up, and it was like, oh well,
yeah,
now we do. The project. So that in that case, the project really drove the decision, I think, to proceed with the EIFD.
Yeah, Josh, I would just chime in and say the county doesn't always have to participate. But to Greg's point, if the city doesn't have enough of a tax base or a portion of the tax that they're going to be able to do a significant project with it, that's the calculation you're doing up front, right? Trying to figure out if you're going to have enough increment that you can actually, it's worth it to do a project with it. You can partner with the county, you can partner with another city. Each of these tools, though, has different benefits to it. So, for example, like the CREAs, or really, if you're looking at an affordable housing development, CREA might be the tool that you're looking at because it's taken right from redevelopment law and it allows you more flexibility than the EIFDs do. And if you already know that you don't have the money in increment in order to really do a substantive project, you might say, well, a resilience district makes more sense for us because that'll allow you to do assessments where the other couple of TIF districts don't allow you to. So I did see your question, Amanda, about, can you explain the governance of these districts? Each one is different, and that primer that is the image of the primer, that book walks you through each one of those, the governance, the eligible uses, the formation, and other questions that you might have about, is this right for me? But at the end of the day, you do have to do some level of feasibility analysis to make sure you have enough revenue, again, to do a substantive project, or at least the project that you want to accomplish by investing in creating one of these.
Thank you for those points, Gerbax. And yeah, I mean, the process that I've seen with all of this is, you get these, specialist advisor teams that will dive into, the depths of the tax kind of revenue, current and potential future, given specific development plans and, projections on how that will all go. And they come up with an assessment, projection of what the district will generate. And they're fairly detailed and specific. And so you can then make well-informed decisions. But like I think Greg mentioned, you have to be willing to go through that process and invest the resources. So, you know, it really involves getting your local jurisdictions, the cities, and or the county or both involved in the process. And so, you know, they're long lead things. And if you have, you know, specific projects or goals that would potentially, you know, that would come from SEDS or these regional planning activities that are happening, those would then inform, you know, your local jurisdictions about whether they were going to take action to make it happen. And I've seen it as a, you know, political advocacy process to electeds, to, you know, city managers and CAOs and getting them on board with, you know, this direction. So this is not to say by any means that we've covered all of this material in depth, but to say that these are tools that offer the most flexibility and you know, ability to cover emerging topics from this planning activity. And we will expect to go in more depth. As I mentioned, we'd love to bring back some of these state experts that we've mentioned and have them do a deep dive, and it could be a special meeting, so it wouldn't have to take up our whole workshop. Marianne asked about a special district. I'm going to say that these, what would you say about that, Gerbax? I don't know that I'm aware of a special district putting together an EIFD.
I can't think of one that has, or that they have the ability to specifically for EIFDs. I don't think they do, but I think that they can participate if they're a tax sharing entity. School districts cannot. I mean, you can't touch school money on any of these tools. But I do think, although I can't think of a one where we know that a district is a partner, I think they're all cities and counties.
Yeah, so I think
Dana, are you guys tracking that? Oh, sorry, Josh.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Gerbax, I don't know that I have heard of any special districts that have established their own. And I think I do think it is an eligibility issue, but certainly duly noted. We're not tracking any.
Are joint powers eligible?
Go ahead. I was just going to say to Gerbax's point that once you set up a EIFD or you're planning for one, in addition to working with the city and the county, certainly you'd want to talk to special districts or other taxing entities so that you broaden the base. Another thing too to think about, to Greg's point about the slow ramp up in terms of the revenue from the tax increment financing district, is in some cases you might want to look at another financing vehicle like an assessment district or a community facility district to take care of generating some revenue in the early years before the increment takes off. You know, they call that stacking districts. That's another possibility.
So this discussion will go on. Let's just say that we're just kind of scratching the surface on this, but we did want to go a little farther into the subject matter than we were going to get with the overview that Gerbax provided so well. And yeah, Jeff, we're going to put together an if that's a subject of interest. One thing I'm going to reference here coming right up is our survey that we did looking for topics of interest from this group. But just to get there, and I think what I'm going to do is just surface this subject, and we're going to bring it back for more in-depth at the next meeting. But one of our key deliverables out of this work is going to be our plan and process for compiling records of existing financings throughout the region so that we can develop this database of reference material that could be searched by tool type or project type and just provide points of reference for organizations or entities that are trying to understand how these tools have been used. And so in the interest of time, I think what I'll do is table the rest of the conversation on that subject for the next one. I know Tracy's going to be diving into that and has already done some good work accessing federal data sources on these topics, but we'll want to just put those up there, show some of the records that they're providing, and talk about how we might go about ensuring that we're capturing the breadth of tools that we're covering here for in the phase 2 work. Tracy, did you want to add anything else besides that? Is that enough?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Josh.
Okay. So before we move to the survey that we shared with you all, I did want to remind you all about the RISE project database, which is accessible on the main website for redwoodregionrise.org. I think we'll get you there. We've been looking at those data so far, and there's only been 30 projects that have been submitted into that database. And we know there's more than 30 projects that exist out there. And so for us, this working group is actually a great source of information to see what are the kinds of projects the region, the proponents of the community groups involved in the Jobs First activity are thinking about. You can see that of the 30 projects, the total volume for dollars is just over 83 million and potentially more. We know that the catalyst dollars are about 9 million. So there's quite a gap between just the catalyst money and what people are thinking about in these projects. And they have quite a range from $10,000 to 30 million per project. So it will be interesting to, dive more into that and then understand what the projects are. But we also want to encourage people to advocate for people to enter their projects into this database. So on that note, also the capacity survey that I know was sent out to most of the people on this list. We've had 5 responses. So we're hoping that, to your point, Jeff, the subject matters that you're most interested in hearing about, it will help inform what we bring back to this group and build into the next phase of the work. But we do have some results, and I think Brian was going to step us through what some of those outcomes were, less about specific things such as EIFD focused session and more focused on these 3 topics. So Brian, do you want to step us through what we found here so far?
Sure. Thank you, Josh. So the first area was a question about what are the biggest challenges that you're facing. And based on our initial results, certainly there's some concern about eligibility requirements, lack of awareness of available tools, and then insufficient local funding. There was also one person who indicated other. So if that person wants to share with us what the other might be, that would be helpful as well. If not, we'll move on to the next slide, which is what additional resources or support do you believe would enhance your use of these tools? And clearly, access to information was the big winner here by far, which I think dovetails nicely with the initiative that we have here, and followed by training programs and networking. And again, the ever popular others there. And then on the third slide, a question about what resources have you found most helpful to date in terms of learning about the tools? And certainly we see that things like workshops and training, collaborating with other professionals and local websites were the big three there. And again, I think that dovetails nicely with the scope of this project. So with that, I'll turn it back to Josh.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I see the question there from Jeff about taking a look at the project list. And I think that is a question for our friend Amanda and her colleagues up there at CCRP. I don't know if that can be addressed now, Amanda, or maybe we should come up with an approach for that and bring it back.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I would like to talk through it with you guys a little more. The only reason being we did have a few people put entries in there that said that they don't want us to talk about them. So I think we'd have to do a little circling around to those folks and say, well, what would you like us to do at this phase? And how can we move this towards public consumption? But the vast majority said yes, these are not secret projects and we want your input and help with them. So maybe give us a little time for follow-up. We can explore sharing the list out next meeting.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, let's do that. I know Gerbax's folks just showed up surprisingly, so she has to bag out on us before the end. So thank you, Gerbax, for joining us. We appreciate. Yep, we appreciate you making the time, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure. All of us.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Hopefully it's a pleasant surprise. Have a good rest of your day.
Wait,
Bye.
she won't do it. So don't forget CalEd conference early bird ends February 16th. There, I did it for you.
Thank you, Greg. Hope to see you guys there.
Okay, Amanda, you have your hand back up.
Hi, yes, me again. I did want to say on this project's thing that we have had some folks come forward and actually ask for the help of the EDF to workshop some issues they're coming up against. We had one group that's fiscally sponsored by another NGO was trying to build a training center, and they got a HUD award to do so, but it's reimbursable and they don't have the funding, so they need some bridge help. So I have some things like that where there are actually specific requests for help. I don't know if that's within scope for you all or how we might approach those.
Yeah, that's a good topic. I mean, with all the expertise on the call, it's almost like you would hate to waste it by just doing death by PowerPoint, and so I think if there was a way that we could take those on. I think Susan and I talked about this case study idea as sort of a step, but those would be retrospective. So not as much workshopping a particular project. So I would like to think more about that, and then maybe we can figure out how that would work. I would kind of again put that one for something more to discuss. Yeah. Dana, you have your hand raised.
I do, and maybe kind of follow up to Amanda, but I'm looking at future topics, and I know this group is specific to economic development finance, but something that we're starting to see in many of our other regions is kind of a disconnect, perhaps, between project development and the actual implementation of said projects and the roles and responsibilities that go with that implementation. And so while this is focused on financing, perhaps there's also the opportunity to start looking at jurisdictional authorities and permitting and alignment with other plans and or things like capital project CIP lists that are existing in our counties and in our cities, because we're gonna quickly find ourselves, I think, with a lot of great projects that have absolutely no alignment with what's already happening with those jurisdictional partners. And it would be great to head that off before we get too far down a path of either disappointment or conflicting priorities. So that's a very frank, it's a frank point that I'm trying to make, but the sooner that the region can start to have a dialogue about this, the sooner or the better we might have in avoiding those conflicts and really starting to build around this key alignment, not to the exclusion of anything, certainly, but really starting to think about how to slot projects and where they fit, and really taking on an understanding of how projects align with what's already happening in the region, and making sure that decision makers are tracking these ideas that are coming out of the community. So just a reminder.
Yeah, that's a good topic. I don't, I agree that the alignment with the public process, and I think that's what we were kind of leaning towards with Gerbax's reference to the, focus on the public agency aspect of economic development, that as projects evaluate their fundability, a critical then next piece, as you say there, Dana, will be implementation. Is it feasible to implement? And really, until you get into that public process, the pipeline of capital improvement plans, and the like, you will be kind of forked off of that. You'll have a much harder time of getting actually something done. So that's a really important aspect. I don't know. We'll have to figure out how to bring that into this in a formal way. I keep looking to Susan, who's my guide on all this, but I do appreciate the point, Dana, and we'll have to consider that. Tracy.
Yeah, if I could jump on that subject. So, I've been tasked with identifying tools that are already in place, or tools that are already financing tools that have already been utilized. Josh has mentioned that I'm utilizing the known federal resources for that information. But the next step for me will be reaching out to your local, county, city, special district agencies to find out what they have done. And that'll be a good opportunity for me to also ask them about what is prospective for them. And they probably can't talk about that very effectively without getting out their CIP. So that's yeah, so that's part of what I think we're going to try to do as part of the tool identification, because very important in actually down the road in actually figuring out what tools apply best to what things, is to understand the broad regional appetite for projects, how to finance those projects most effectively, given the tools, and what the regional capacities are. That's a big piece of this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and I see a good discussion going on about revolving loan fund, and that is a good topic for this group. The basic idea being taking some of the either catalyst and or implementation funds and putting it into a loan fund that can help projects get started or move forward in some kind of sequenced fashion, but maybe live longer than an individually financed project. That is, the fund could live longer because it could generate returns and things. I know that there's a variety of ideas around that, and I think there was even a proposal being put forward towards that idea, led by maybe RCRC has an idea around that, but that I think would be interesting to explore. further. That could be a subject for another day. What we have up here are what we are proposing for the regular monthly meeting of this group. And really this tracks to our end goals. And so it gives us a chance to at least touch on the points that we have spec'd out as becoming part of our phase 2 work plan. And having discussions with you all at some level about those. But I'm hearing a number of other topics being surfaced here that we will want to consider. You can see if we meet monthly, by June, we've met for a total of 6 times. I did, and we have thought about like bringing in extra sessions for focused speakers, like a EIFD focus session with, you know, the Larry Cosmonts and of the world, or other specialists on those subjects. So those could be in addition to these. And then I guess the question becomes, you know, at what level do we want to get into like some real workshop-y type discussions where, you know, people could bring their project ideas and get some feedback on those. And I think we're going to have to, that those would require additional gatherings, and it perhaps would not be, you know, ones that everybody would want to go to, but maybe there could be a mechanism set up to, you know, hey, if people want to get in and workshop some ideas to learn from them, maybe that's a valuable way to go. Stacy.
I was just going to share, Josh, that I am leading a project that's just specific to Mendocino County, convening economic development stakeholders. And a lot of what we're trying to accomplish is very, the work would be very complementary of each other.
Great.
So one, I think I need to schedule an offline meeting with you just to kind of bring you up to date and see how we can work together to eliminate additional meetings. But
Yeah, great.
one question that popped in my mind when you mentioned like workshop specific, if this working group gets to a point where we have some very specific topics that folks are interested in, do you ever see that as potentially opening it up to more stakeholders? If we have a specific training topic, could that be something that other community-based organizations might be able to join?
Yes, that is, so this initial body of work resulted from some funding that was set up with one idea in mind for its use, and was kind of reoriented towards this project given the outcomes of the how the whole thing has been rolling out. That is the Redwood Rise activity. And so with that in mind and some strategic thinking, there was additional effort put into this next round of funding. So it would give us the ability to have more flexibility in who could be involved and how frequently we could do work on behalf of this effort. And that's supposed to, I think, roll out mid-year. So really what we're trying to do here is kind of surface the different you know, priorities. That's why we're doing this survey and trying to get feedback from everyone, and then come with kind of a more robust engagement process and support process through the latter part of the year. Now, we understand, of course, that's going to come in a little bit late in terms of this catalyst funding activity, but I would say let us take this back and revisit what we might be able to offer for a little more flexibility. Marianne, I like your idea about office hours. That's a good suggestion. And so let's see if we can figure out a way that we can kind of offer that kind of project level review and discussion.
That would be great, because some of the intent in bringing this group together was just to make sure Mendo like, we understand not all the projects are going to meet the RISE's criteria. So then we just want to make sure that everybody's communicating about everything that's going on, which everyone on this call knows is a challenge in itself. So I will circle back with you directly.
Okay.
Thank you so
Good.
much.
Yeah. I know we're running a little over here, so Marianne, you have your hand up and then we'll wrap her up.
Yeah, it's okay. I could follow offline. I just wanted to talk a little bit about off of what Stacy was saying. Leading a sector table, we're actually putting our projects together now, and there will be more that will be coming. We have a very specific plan of attack for the blue economy and working lands. But I think no sooner do we get that project list prioritized and analyzed, we're going to need help with these financial tools and how they relate to those projects. So anytime after March 18th, I think that's going to be something that we would love to call upon this group in some way to help us strategize about what tools would be right for what project.
Right. Yeah, I think, that's the real immediate value of this kind of activity is that, and so we will do that. We will look at how we can open up for that kind of project level support, and then bring something back at the next meeting, which is going to be March 20th, if not before. We can communicate out any findings before that, because I know that seems like a long ways away, but I can also say that, boy, this time goes so fast. And I know everybody's meeting a lot in different rooms too in the meanwhile, so hopefully it's not the end of the discussion, but anytime there's a finance related general idea of value, feel free to send it back to us so that we can think about it for future workshop integration. And I think that I'll stop sharing because the most important slide up there was when our next meeting is. And you have that. You have our communication, how to get to us. And yeah, we will do this thinking that we've just been talking about and come back to you all with some more mechanisms for accessing us and those resources for your projects as soon as we can. Anything else for the good of the order, Susan?
No, I just wanted to say that this is exactly sort of what I wanted this group to do, as Amanda just said. This is a group that wants to roll up their sleeves and get to work.
Yeah.
And I wanted to create this group to do that. So hopefully we'll be doing that soon.
Walter.
Yeah, just some food for thought, I guess, as we all say good evening to each other. But I think I want to keep it really simple and let everybody know this. Tribes do not have tax bases, nor will they ever have. Just think about that when we discuss all of these tools and things like that exist around that.
Yeah.
You might.
Yeah, well, Walter, one thing that we won't be doing is saying we have a super deep understanding of all the nuances around the constraints that the tribes face in the financing. So if there's a mechanism where we could learn more about that, I think that would be quite informative, certainly for someone like me, but would help us understand at least the problem space about if there are and how we might be able to offer some value to the challenges that you all face. So perhaps that's a separate conversation. We're just meeting here, but I'd like to understand that better.
So
yeah, I think over time it will become a little more clear and evident. I just wanted to kind of put that out there so that people think about that, because sometimes often that causes focus on solutions to the problems that we face rather than just me sitting here complaining about kind of what I have to work through to try to put things together.
Right.
I
Thank
wanted to add to Walter that, we'll be talking about a variety of financing options, and some of those will be tribal specific as well. So they might be very specific to tribes and not necessarily to counties or cities. But we want this group to be well formed in all of the different areas. So thank you for listening to this one today, which might not be as relevant to you, but another week it might be very relevant. That's the hope.
Yeah, and Layla, I'd take you up on that offer for sure, to connect with those folks. Yeah, we'll put the slide deck and the recording for this up on the website in the next couple of days, working with Leone and that. So this will be available, and there's links to all the stuff we covered in the slide deck. Amanda.
I just wanted to just second Walter's point and see if we can, focus some of our case study work on the innovative things that our tribes have done, and recognize that Hoopa Valley Tribe is one of the major employers in our region, and
Right.
done amazing work. So yeah, thank you so much for raising that, Walter.
Okay, well, lots to follow up on, and thank you all for making the time, and we'll see you again soon.